So I love to start with what education has meant to you. You grew up in Los Angeles area, you went to public school, which sometimes can be rare in LA. How was that going to public school? What made your family want to go after the public school situation? Because a lot of folks out for private school in LA. Tell me more about that.
Yeah, actually, I started off going to private Jewish school from preschool until around the time I was in the 10th grade. So I was someone that grew up kind of with the same class of like 30 kids, and we kind of like all stuck in a bubble throughout that entire time. And the environment that that created for me was it felt very insular and claustrophobic. And obviously, can be very beautiful things about existing in community with people for that long, but it could also be very limiting. So one of the benefits that like I definitely think are out there with public school is kind of the ability to see that community grow and change as you have more variety, as more kids come and go, and it's kind of more free flowing in that sense. So I didn't really begin to interact with the public school system until around 10th or 11th grade. And like, there definitely was that difference there. It was definitely a bit of like a culture shock for me, growing up, having half of my day spent learning Jewish studies and half of it being, regular school. But it being the exact same classroom and like, exactly who your teacher's going to be the next year. Like, it's a very small universe compared to public school where you're kind of exposed to a lot of different things. So I guess that's the biggest difference that I've seen.
Who made the decision to make the school change? Was it your parents? Was it you? How did that discussion go out?
Yeah, well, that was actually a lot. There was a lot more that went into that decision than just simply let's change schools. I had to completely drop out of school in the 10th grade because I ended up in the hospital with an eating disorder, which is something I publicly talk about a lot. And I talk about what it's like to be institutionalized for mental health conditions. I do a lot of advocacy around just general institutionalization for disabled folks and how that interacts with general institutionalization and carceral systems in the country. And that's something that I'm very passionate about, having that lens of lived experience with what I went through. But kind of during that time, basically the private school that I went to couldn't really accommodate for my needs. And it's really an interesting thing to think about how a public school is better suited to do so, because that can seem very counterintuitive. But what I think about public school is like, a lot of times the way that it's structured is it's like kids have to be in school. They have to learn how to accommodate for something like that because you need to be in school. So I think it was just kind of at the time my parents and I were trying to figure out how to go about re-entering the school system. And my public school, which was Beverly Hills High School, they had a program which is, pretty rare, where it's kind of more individualized, independent learning. And this was right before COVID when I re-entered high school. It was like October of 2019. And there's a program called the Independent Learning Center through BHHS. And basically, you teach yourself the rest of high school. And it's designed specifically for kids that kind of have careers. So a lot of them are actors and models, which makes sense given the area. Some of them are athletes. But some of them were just not able to stay in a more institutionalized, classroom-based academic setting for whatever reason. And you're set up with one teacher, and that's the one person that kind of guides you through every subject. You kind of just teach it to yourself using an online platform. And because, I was still kind of trying to figure out my way back into the social world after having been completely isolated from it for 2 years. Going back and being thrown back into a social setting just did not seem feasible to accommodate for my needs. So that just kind of made the most sense.
Well, thank you so much for your courage. Love how passionate you are about helping people. And you sharing your story, it inspires so many other young and old people to be able to be themselves and get the help needed. And I love that you're so passionate about it. And thank you for being so vulnerable on the pod. Let's talk about what the online platform was, because you have such a unique experience in high school. You went into multiple different modalities and you lived through a pandemic.
Mm.
And so what was that like? What was it like being a high schooler during that time? And how did the school support you from a digital curriculum standpoint?
Yeah, it's really interesting. I like to call myself ground zero, patient zero for Zoom, because I was actually using Zoom before the pandemic, while I was in the hospital actually, and trying to figure out, how to meet the legal requirements for school. I used Zoom for some time, kind of, to be able to interact with teachers outside the hospital because I was, there for so long. And then, yeah, coming back into the real world, coming back, so to speak, and coming back into school. The online platform that I used at first was not kind of video call based. It was just kind of pretty much an online textbook that you flip through, and like it has some like quizzes built in, and like you finish the chapters, and then you finish, each course class has like 9 chapters, and you just kind of go through them.